Hey everyone, and welcome to the How to Japanese podcast. This is the Murakami season. It is April 13th. It is 1 in the morning in Osaka, Japan. And I've just read the first two chapters of Murakami's new novel, The City and Its Uncertain Walls, is the English title we're being given on the cover. The Japanese title is Machi to Sono Futashika na Kabe. And wow, there is a lot going on. It's kind of incredible. So yeah, I will try to talk more generally and broadly without giving any spoilers at all for the first few minutes. At some point I'll start to kind of talk slightly more specifically, and then I will just go into full-blown spoiler-palooza. And I'll give warnings before I do any of this so that you can hit the eject button and save the rest of this podcast for 2024 when we get an English translation. First of all, this is exciting. This is the first Murakami novel that's being distributed digitally at launch. And sure enough, I had my Kindle loaded up and was watching it at midnight, and it took another 30 seconds or so, about a minute into the day, but then it loaded up, and it was pretty incredible. It's also been incredible just to see the huge range of Murakami texts that are available on Kindle. Not like they're difficult to track down or find, but there is some very weird, obscure stuff that is now much easier to find, and maybe will kind of go on to have a more readership in Japan than it otherwise might have had as kind of languishing paperbacks and book off. So that's kind of cool. That has been cool to see. It looks like there's been some midnight launch parties. I've been watching tweets a little bit, and there are people in Shinjuku, a couple other stores I've seen. So yeah, let's get into the book a little bit. I think I can safely say that it's a rewriting of the 1980 novella. None of you will probably have read that, so I don't think it's a spoiler unless you've probably heard a little bit of what I've said about the novella, in so much as it's connected to Hardball Wonderland. It's a rough draft of Hardball Wonderland, but it's still significantly different. And this is significantly different from the novella, I will say that much. But it is very clearly not a sequel to Hardball Wonderland and the End of the World. That you know immediately. The first sentence is the same first sentence as the novella, and I've done. This is a tradition, so I won't call this a spoiler. This is a tradition that I've done with every Murakami launch, and that first sentence in Japanese is, let me just rewind my Kindle. It is, 君が僕にその街を教えてくれた。君が僕にその街を教えてくれた。You told me about the town / city. And that's the same way the 1980 novella starts. So he's truly digging deep into his archives, and not just to kind of steal the title like I thought he might be doing, and then kind of taking that world. It's like a rewrite, I think. So I don't think it's a spoiler to say that he is not. I'll be very curious to see where, if anything, Hardball Wonderland comes into the picture here. But it doesn't at this point. So it's basically rewriting it. It feels very early Murakami. It's very easy to read. It's not as dense as some of his more recent works. Big blocks of text that I think of when I think of Killing Commendatory, 1Q84, even the Wind Up Bird Chronicle and Sputnik's Sweetheart are very dense compared to Dance, 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 South of the Border, West of the Sun, Norwegian Wood, A Wild Sheep Chase. Those kind of like more lightly narrated novels. And he's got that touch so far in the first chapter. So I like it so far. I mean, it's great so far. the it yeah. So that's all I'll say for now. I'll give the first warning that I'll go into a little bit of spoilers in this next section. So if you don't want to know anything more, then because that news will definitely come out, you'll definitely hear that this is connected to one of his past works and that it's related to Hardball Wonderland and the End of the World. You'll hear that before it goes into English translation, but I don't think you'll hear anything else other than that. So now I'll say a little bit more. And so yeah, I'll give you a minute, just a second. Are you going to go? Everybody still here? Anybody still sticking around? Okay. All right, let's continue. We will continue. It's not alternating chapters. It's sticking with the same protagonist from chapter 1 to chapter 2. So that's interesting so far. I mean, in the last predictions podcast, one thing that I really got deeply into was the idea that Hardball Wonderland has this incredible level of balance between the two sections that really help, I think, prevent the reader from getting exhausted, preventing reader exhaustion by balancing tone, balancing earnestness. I think I used the word sincere about 50 times in the last podcast, but I think earnest is the phrase I was looking for. Murakami has turned earnest, I think, after the Wind Up Bird Chronicle. And it feels like that is maintained in this book so far. I think when you lose that data agent side of things, unless it's somehow he comes back, I don't see it happening, to be honest. You lose that kind of whimsy, you lose that irony, you lose that kind of criticism of society, of the world, of other people, and you only are left with that sincere earnestness, I think, which has become really characteristic of Murakami over the last 25 years, I want to say. So that's the kind of book we're looking at so far. It's incredibly earnest so far. It's I'll talk about a couple of my predictions too. I got one word right. I got the kokoro o hikareru. Wait, let me see what the phrase is. Let me see if I can find it real quick. And it's, let's see. I'll say, Kimi wa sore ni kokoro o hikareru. And I won't say what yet. I'll say that in the later section of the podcast. But your heart was drawn in by that. Your kokoro was drawn in by something, right? So that was right. And I was right about the young characters. The protagonists are 16 and 17, and so I was right to question that. I was not right to say maybe he'll talk about age, because that's not happening so far. But I was right to say he's writing about young characters again. I think somewhere in my bibliography podcast, I mentioned one of his little nonfiction collections of essays where he thinks that the best time for love is between like ages 16 and 21 for whatever reason. I haven't read the whole article, but I think I quoted a piece of it or was able to summarize it from somebody's Wikipedia entry. And I imagine it has something to do with the idea that that's the age when you're most impressionable and least cynical. And he seems to be going for that here. You've got this incredibly earnest connection between these two people that seems to be driving this novel so far in the first two chapters, and we'll see where it goes from here. What else? Let me see what I had in my predictions podcast real quick. I'm not going to do much editing of this because it's 1 a.m. and we don't have time for that. So he's rewriting a story. I was right about that. The characters are going to go to a library. Yes. Are they going to be isolated? That we'll find out. Or what role are phones going to play? That actually could happen now. Very well could happen. And I'll get into that in the later part of the podcast. How's he depicting young women in the book? That will be very interesting to see. So far, I would say relatively safe. How are the ends of his chapters? So far under control. They seem very everything seems very under control. There's no immediacy yet. That was the other thing that the data agent helped balance, was the immediacy. You are more in the driver's seat with him than you are in the end of the world sections with the Dream Reader, which is much more of a controlled narrative, giving us a better passage of time, more like a novelistic passage of time, whereas with Murakami, you're in a first-person shooter type passage of time. You're always there. Are his characters telling lies or hesitant to communicate with people? It seems like there's a little bit of that. This narrator has this sense that he cannot communicate something to this other character, and I'll get into that again more specifically in the later part of the podcast. It doesn't have an afterword or a forward. It doesn't have a forward, I should say. I don't know about the afterword yet. It's not listed in the index, so maybe I was wrong about that. And yeah, I think I'll do another marker here, because I think I'm ready to just dig in. I'm ready to talk about this with somebody, because this is crazy. This is really wild what he's done here. Okay, so, all right, gonna take a moment. Everybody, you're still around? All right, there are some people left. Goodbye. Come back later. Okay. So he's rewritten his novella, and it starts off the exact same way that the novella starts off. These two characters, the narrator's Boku, boy, male character, 17 years old. He's talking to Anata, I guess. Let's see. Is that what it is? It's not Kimi. It's Kimi. He's talking to Kimi, is the name of you. So it's told in second person. That's probably something I should have said at the beginning of the podcast. Maybe I'll go in and add something in about that. But it's told in second person. Boku is addressing Kimi, so I am addressing you in this novel. And in the first chapter, they're walking along the river in twilight, which is exactly what happens in the novella. It's edited to a certain extent. There's one section that's cut, the kind of experimental, weird section about words dying and things like that are cut so far. And they're walking along this river. They're, cool water on their ankles. And then they sit down, and you start to tell the narrator, Kimi starts to tell the narrator about this town where her true self lives. So right now, the person that the narrator has been dating is just a replacement, a substitute, a shadow of herself, she says. And her real self lives in this town surrounded by a wall. And so it's just like the novella. And in the novella, what happens next is that the narrator just kind of goes to the town. The Kimi says, you can come here if you want. There's a place for you in this town. It's hard to get there, but if you want it badly enough, you can go there. And you have a role as the dream reader. In the novella, it was prophet was the word, yogensha, I think that was the word he used. So he's clearly edited that to match Hardboiled Wonderland and the End of the World. And so the first chapter ends with the narrator kind of thinking about this idea. And then in the novella, he's in the town, and we get these, end of the world sections. Whereas now in this new novel, we're in some unnamed city in the second chapter, which is a real city, not like end of the world type city. This is a city where you live an hour and a half away from the person you date. It takes 2 train transfers to get there, and so you only see them once or twice a month for reasons, right? So these two are 17 and 16. They're going to different high schools. They're seeing each other once or twice a month. And the narrator has a physical desire for Kimi, this you, still told in second person, but is hesitant to kind of broach that subject too soon. There's reasons why they can't, because they're so young. They don't really have a location, but also he feels that broaching the subject would kind of throw things off in an unfixable way. And so that's the section where the maybe characters don't feel able to communicate something. That's maybe a little bit of Murakami logic, where it'd be unrealistic we just kind of have to assume that what this narrator is saying is true, that there is no way to kind of communicate this physical desire for another person. But they just enjoy talking. That's the biggest reason, he says. And so they just kind of hang out some weekends. Sometimes he'll go see her. Sometimes she lives in a bigger city, and so they'll go to like a park or something. And then sometimes she'll come visit him, and he lives in a bit more rural area, so they'll go to the seaside or to a river, and they just talk and talk and talk, and suddenly their time is up and they have to part. And at some point during this summer of, I guess, the narrator's third year and the Kimi's second year of high school, she starts to describe this town, and it makes it feel like Murakami is taking this into the world idea and injecting it into one of his short stories from the 80s. You've got this very basic idea of these two people with this great connection, and the woman is now kind of maybe quirky or something like that, or imaginative, and starts telling this story to the narrator. And he's like, oh yeah, and he's very supportive, and he goes as far as calling himself the kind of apostle for her, that she's the person kind of creating this fiction of this town, this city, surrounded by a wall, with a river running through it and 3 bridges over it, just like we know from the town of Horrible Wonderland. And as she creates it, he's asking her questions about realistic aspects of it and fixing the town in place, he kind of says. And so it's this kind of game that they're playing so far. And on that level, it really works, I think. It's a really interesting idea, despite how sad it is to lose those data agent sections of that novel. It is a really interesting take on it. I am really curious to see where it's going to go. Obviously, I'm just invested in that Horrible Wonderland idea, and so I think I was going to have a certain level of momentum going into it, but the first couple chapters are short. It feels readable. I'm cautiously optimistic after being after kind of really only enjoying one of his last 3 novels. I think I'm pretty cautiously optimistic. Okay, what else was I going to spoil for you all? Let's see. Let me go back to my predictions and see what else I was going to spoil. What role will phones play? So yeah, the phones very well could play a role in this. They're living in a real city with trains and things like that, in a real Japan, an unnamed Japan. So he's not naming these characters, very much like pre Norwegian Wood Murakami fiction, where everyone was kind of unnamed, and it wasn't until Norwegian Wood where we got the Toru, and then after that Murakami starts to feel more comfortable giving his characters names, I feel like. So phones could play a role. I think that's about it. Yeah. How's he young? He is writing about young people. That is maybe a bit strange now that he just keeps going back to this one era that he's obsessed with. Although, we know that it was a really formative time for at least, a formative time in terms of the fiction he gave us early in his career, that it was a kind of time of grieving, when he lost a lot of people, and there were a lot of suicides, in his first couple novels. And I think, early on the narrators were kind of reacting in an ironic, detached kind of way, and maybe now this earnestness is the flip side of that coin. So yeah, that's where we're at right now. It's now like 1:30 in the morning, and I guess I'll read a little bit longer because I was like really tired after work, and now I don't feel quite so tired. I'm a little bit more energized going into it. I have a Kindle version now. I should be getting a paper version. It says I'm only on page 16, which is kind of depressing because it's a 674 page novel. And the other little detail I can share is that it's in 3 parts: part 1, part 2, part 3. So I would say, yeah, I have no idea where it's going to go. I can see from the start of chapter 3 looks like it's going to be a lot like the second chapter of Hardball Wonderland that I read on the Predictions podcast, where you start to see autumn in the town from the narrator's eyes as the beasts grow out their golden hair, and we get this amazing scene where they are called by the gatekeeper, herded by the gatekeeper at the end of the day. And so I think that's what's going to be on the part of 3. But the idea is that, again, this is just an extension of this story that these 2 people are building together. So yeah, again, maybe it's Murakami seeing that ultimately the town as this symbol of a life that 2 people create, a relationship that 2 people create together. This metaphorical entity that people create when they start a relationship. So that's a better prediction than probably what I had in the last episode. But and then the kokoro hikareru is that's the Kimi character was always drawn to water. He says, when they go on these dates and when she goes over to his town, what they end up doing is either going to the seaside or going to the river and kind of hanging out. And so her heart was pulled in by water. So that's why they end up kind of going there. And so, yes, I feel vindicated about at least one of my predictions. We'll see. I'll be watching the language really closely for the other language that I mentioned. And again, if you listened to the end of this, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Track me down in Osaka. I will buy you a beer. And in terms of what comes next, I don't know. I think I'll probably wait a little while before doing any more podcast episodes. I want to have a little bit more to say. So probably maybe in a month or so, once I've got my review out somewhere. And if you are somebody who needs a review written, holler at me. I think that I want to write, somewhere around 2,000 words or so. So if you know anyone looking for a review, let me know. So yeah, I'll sign off from Osaka right now. Check out Twitter, and also I just started posting on Substack Notes, so you can check me out there too. And yeah, I look forward to talking to you again soon, hopefully.